let's say two people have the same BMI. One person has quite a bit of muscle mass, while the other person has less muscle mass, but is carrying a bit more fat, especially around their belly. Now their BMIs say that they are equal, but their health risks, those are not equal. And this is the problem with BMI, and it's why we can't rely on it alone as a measure of health, because it can't see where the fat is or how your body is built. And with all the weight loss medications that are quickly becoming available to quite a lot of people, we need to be able to measure progress in ways that better reflect health. Because the number on the scale, or BMI alone, it isn't good enough. So today, I'll be talking about some waist measurements that are able to predict your risk better than BMI, and then you'll be able to figure out these numbers for yourself at home. So what is BMI? Well, it stands for Body Mass Index, and it is your weight in kilograms divided by the square of your height. It's a quick and simple calculation to do, and that's why it's used everywhere as a general guide to weight. Now, there are different categories of BMI, going from underweight to obese, and it's usually a screening tool to see where someone's weight stands, but there are some issues. The main problem with BMI is that it can't tell the difference between muscle and fat, and more importantly, it can't actually see where the fat is sitting on a person's body, which is actually incredibly important. Your BMI could sit in the healthy weight category, but if you happen to still have a higher waist circumference, then you actually still carry some health risks. Or on the other hand, if you're someone who lifts weights and you have quite a bit of muscle on you, that might actually push your weight into the overweight range. Does that mean you need to lose weight? I wouldn't really think so. And so this is why I like to focus more on waist-based measurements alongside BMI, because BMI does have a place and it's very useful. It just needs some help to give a clearer picture about what's going on, especially with someone's health. And it seems a lot of people tend to agree with this, because just last week I did a video on a new definition of obesity that has been put forward, and that brings in these waist measurements that I'm talking about. So I'll link that video in the description if you missed it last week. So why is waist so important? Well, it's because the fat that accumulates around the waist, or belly fat as some people refer to it, gives us an indication of the amount of visceral fat that a person has. And so I just want to use this diagram to help explain this. So here you can see, hopefully, 3 layers. The first layer is the subcutaneous fat layer. Now this is found all over the body and it sits just under your skin. It's very important and it helps to provide insulation so you don't get too cold. It also provides cushioning to protect muscle and bones, and it stores energy because you can break down the fat here and turn it into energy if you need. That doesn't mean you can't have too much subcutaneous fat, but it does have a very clear role to play. Now beneath that subcutaneous fat will be your muscle layer, and when you're looking at the waist in particular, these are going to be your abdominal muscles. I won't spend too much time on that, but we hopefully know that muscle is important. I've gone through that a few times on the channel already. I want to instead focus on what's beneath that muscle layer, and that is the visceral fat. So this layer of fat, you can't see it directly. You often can't even feel it either, but it accumulates and it will gather itself around your organs, like your liver, your pancreas, even your intestines. And we need to be aware of this layer of fat because it's metabolically active. It increases inflammation, and it does that because it puts stress on the tissues around it, and your body responds to that with inflammation. Now this inflammation, it can lead to insulin resistance, which increases blood sugar. It can lead to increases in blood pressure because it can damage your blood vessels. It can also lead to fatty liver. So all of these things, they'll actually be developing slowly in the background without you noticing, often until it's a bit late. This visceral fat is a much better indicator of someone's health risks, and BMI, it gives us no information about it, but waist circumference does. To measure waist circumference, you just need some measuring tape, and you would measure usually at the midpoint between your lowest rib and your hip bone. So you find the middle of those two things. Now the waist circumference measurement alone is useful, but what you may also hear about is the waist to hip ratio. So this is another simple calculation. It is just your waist circumference divided by your hip circumference. It essentially gives us a more accurate picture about how much fat a person is carrying around their abdominal area, because this is the area that is most linked to health risks. So the higher this waist to hip ratio, the higher your risks of developing type 2 diabetes or heart disease. So we need to talk about the numbers, because there's no point getting all these measurements without understanding what they mean for you. So the World Health Organization states that a waist circumference above 80 centimeters for women or 94 centimeters for men is considered as having an increased risk for chronic health conditions, while a waist circumference above 88 centimeters for women and 102 centimeters for men is then associated with a substantially increased risk of chronic conditions. So these are numbers that Australia also follows for their own guidelines, but you'll see that many other countries, they follow these numbers too. The bottom line here is, if you're a woman, aim to have a waist circumference that is below 80 centimeters, and if you're a man, aim for a waist circumference that is below 94 centimeters to reduce your risk of experiencing things like type 2 diabetes and also heart disease. Now, for the waist to hip ratio, for males, a ratio of 0.9 or more is considered to have increased health risks, and for women, it's 0.85. Most of the time, though, you will see waist circumference being referred to and used because it's just easier to get the one measure. Now, if you are wondering where these numbers came from, I will put a link to the World Health Organization report in the description. This is a report that explains their reasoning, but they essentially looked at the existing research, because there have been a number of large studies that have shown that having a larger waist or a higher waist circumference is linked to chronic conditions like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, or even an earlier death. And this is usually independent of BMI, so it doesn't matter what someone's BMI is. And so what this means is that it's just waist circumference alone that is being linked to these conditions. And it's these findings about waist circumference that have actually led to experts putting forward that new definition of obesity that they want to be incorporated that looks more at the waist measurements, and I went through this in last week's video. One thing I do want to mention though is that ethnicity does matter as well. What the WHO stated in their report was that people of different ethnicities may need to follow different cutoff points. I will put the table up on the screen here now, and we can see here, for example, that Asian men actually need to be below 90 centimeters rather than 94 centimeters. So just something to keep in mind. We also tend to see that if a person has a higher BMI that puts them in the overweight or obese categories, then that actually increases the risk even more. So this is showing that if someone already has a high waist circumference that puts them in very high risk, then as their BMI goes up, that risk goes higher and higher. I want people to understand these measurements because, like I said at the beginning, weight loss medications are becoming more and more popular. And a concern I have with them is muscle loss. Not because I think the medications are a problem, but because people aren't being supported enough to also make sure that they are making appropriate lifestyle changes to best support the uses of these medicines. It's really not as simple as inject yourself once a week and go on as usual. The last thing I would want to see is people losing muscle and remaining to have higher waist circumference even as their overall weight or BMI goes down. We want to reduce waist circumference, and yes, that will naturally come as weight reduces, but I just want everyone to be aware of these things and be as informed as possible. So that's all for today. As usual, if you have any questions or anything you would like to see a video on, please leave a comment. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep playing the long game.